Welcome to Artcasters. This is episode 176, which is kind of crazy that we've gotten like 176 episodes. We're over whatever that is. Mathematically, it's a mathematic achievement, is all I'm saying. We're getting to 200. You'll notice I'm a little exhausted. I had a pretty rough day, and then my partners in crime here had a pretty rough trip as well. So before we kind of dip into the topic, our guest today is Cory Kerr from the 48-Hour Art Check and frequent guest on our show. And then, of course, we have with us Scott, and they're on the road. So if there's any connectivity issues that come up or anything like that, just bear with us. We're trying to do this. And we thought it would be fun to kind of combine like a 48-hour art check and an Artcasters, kind of kill two birds with one stone. So before we get into it, let's introduce where everybody can find us. You're on my channel on YouTube, so if you haven't yet, hit subscribe, hit the bell, and then there you go. You know where to find me. And I'll tell you every time there's like an update or whatever. And we got Squatchy joining us in the chats. Hey, Squatchy. And then other than that, you can just read my comic on quarterlystories.com. It's a story about faith, love, and mental illness that I handwrite, hand letter, and hand ink, and then hand to you, hopefully someday in print. But for now, it's on the web, so go check it out there or search for it on topis.io if you want to read it on your iOS devices and stuff. So anyhow, now that that's out of the way, Scott, where can we find you other than in a totally different state?
Yeah. Well, if you happen to be in Georgia, you can find me here in Columbus, Georgia. But yeah, well, I guess weird because usually for the past, I don't know how long I've been talking about Young and the Dead, but the campaign is over now. So I'm not going to send you there. So I'm just going to once again go back to promoting.
Oh, okay. Sorry, there was a lag.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I was just saying my Kickstarter wrapped up, so I'm not going to send you the Kickstarter. I am just going to say if you want some cool tools to build comics, pick up the Comic Maker Starter Kit, and that is at circworks.com.
Nice. And how much is that?
It's totally free.
Free? You've lost your mind. Okay. That will never die. That's going to be an ongoing bit as long as that's up. But seriously, it is a really good deal. Everybody who's downloaded it kind of raves about it. So go check it out. See what tools you can kind of discover there. All right, Cory, where can we find your work? Where can our listeners check you out? Oh, sorry. Before, Matthew and Tim also joined us in the chats. So hello, guys. All right. So Cory, where do we find your stuff?
You can find my stuff on YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. And all of those things are linked to on CoryKerr.com. So CoryKerr.com.
Love it. I love it. And it's pretty insanely like late where you guys are too. So we'll try to be as succinct as possible.
Now we know how some of our guests feel.
Yeah, totally. So for those of you who stay up like super late to check this out live, kudos to you guys. That's amazing. All right, so let's get into kind of doing a really quick art check. I think we'll just do it without visuals or whatever, and we'll just run through it. And I guess I'll just run as the timer or whatever when you guys are going, and then time me. So let's start with you, Cory. What'd you get done so far in the last 48 hours?
I can't remember. I've been trying to think of what I did. I think I've been sketching a few things. I don't really have anything to show. I did a big event yesterday with a bunch of my visual students. We had a few hundred people that showed up and traded stickers and gave away some awards and things like that. And then I went home and started getting ready to leave and got 3 hours of sleep and traveling for 13 hours. So I can't remember what I did, but I'm sure it was impressive and moved thousands of people to tears.
Actually, it is impressive. Just, you touched on that the last 48 our art check or whatever. But the fact that you've kind of built this whole thing and now it's got hundreds of people attending, and it's having a positive impact on the morale of your students and stuff, like that is actually a really hard thing to get through all the kind of red tape and stuff at any school with that much organization. So dude, that is impressive. Like, all right.
And try giving away prizes when the financial department of a university figures out that you're doing that. That's some red tape. And we did it all above board. Everything's cool. But yeah, that was like, because if a university gives a specific student a certain amount of monetary value in a gift, it triggers a bunch of rules, like on the federal level, and then a bunch of accreditation rules. And so we had to make sure that we were like not screwing over our students and nobody was going to get deported. And there's all kinds of interesting things. And so we did everything by the book. It was a great event. It was really cool. And the cool part is some of these students, it's like the first time they've ever had anybody want their stuff. And so, like, you know, I have them like make stickers and then wear the stickers that they're trading. And it like blows their mind when people walk up to them and they're like, hey, can I have a sticker? Like, it's awesome. Let's trade. And they're like, you really want this? I'm like, so it's kind of it's a really cool experience, you know, to see that you make something of value. It's kind of neat.
Yeah, that sounds like a really good lesson too to learn, because I think that's one of the tough things for young art students to kind of pick up is like the value that we offer. So okay, cool. So Scott, what about you? Like, what'd you get done in the last 48 hours?
Last 48 hours. So yeah, Tuesday was the last day of my Kickstarter. So a lot of promotion for that. I did a live stream where I did some sketch cards. I posted a bunch of stuff wherever I could. I think I posted a video or two on, you know, Facebook, and just a bunch of stuff like that. And then it was all kind of prepping for the trip and all that kind of stuff. And so while I was on the trip, so I got up at, what was it? 4 o'clock this morning, and, you know, to catch my flight to get down here. And then I kind of had to wait around for Cory. But while I was on the plane, I did get a chance to kind of play around with the iPad, and I did some client work on there. I'm just playing around with Procreate and Sketchbook, Autodesk Sketchbook.
Nice.
Trying to figure out what I like better. And even though Cory showed me some stuff on Sketchbook, but I mean, I took some tutorials on Procreate, but I don't really like the way that program works. I don't like the brushes and stuff. But people swear by it, so I don't know. But anyway, but I did manage to get some stuff done. After I was done, I realized I could have done this by hand like way quicker.
Yeah, I mean, one hopes that it's kind of like the first time you picked up a Wacom tablet or something. There's like this learning curve.
But I thought because I've been doing so much stuff digital now that it would be easy. But Procreate is no Clip Studio Pro, no matter how many people rave about it.
Yeah,
it just doesn't work as well. But anyway,
I think it's popular because of Stockholm Syndrome. It was like the only thing that was out when it came out. So
how much software?
And then they fell in love with their captor.
Yeah,
that's a brilliant description. How much software do you think is like just Stockholm Syndrome?
A significant portion of Adobe for sure.
Yeah. Oh man, that's a great description. I've never heard that one used. Cool. Well, it sounds like you got a ton done, man, and like not a lot of sleep. So more power to you.
Yeah.
It's funny. I ran into another artist friend very briefly today around lunch, and we just both were just kind of like, yeah, like I didn't get much sleep last night. And it's like, really? And he's like, and I was like, how much is not a lot? And he's like 2 hours. I'm like, yeah. He's like, usually my sleep limit's like 4 hours. And I was like, yep. Like, it's just, that's the life of a creative. So, but anyhow, that's hardcore. You guys are troopers for showing up. All right, so Victor showed up in the chats, and then Tim mentioned just speaking about time, where we were talking about the time differences, that it's midnight in Maine. So
yeah, we're on the same time zone right now,
dude.
So,
yeah. Cool. So let's get into it. What were your challenges? I mean, I think they're probably pretty clear, but what have been your challenges?
I wrapped it all into one.
Yeah, I had to stop at a gas station and grab a root beer and a bunch of candy bars so that I didn't crash and die, because I was pretty tired. Because I had to drive 4 hours to the airport.
Oh, geez.
And so it wasn't like I could get, anyway. Yeah, so I've done about I don't know what, 7 hours of driving today, and then flying, and I should have gotten way more sleep than I did. But that's
Jeez.
the biggest challenge, I think. It's just like when you travel, your day's shot, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it can be like
leave on a good note though, because we went out for dinner for Ethiopian food and it was really good.
Nice. That's awesome. See, there's a shining light there. The other thing is, like, as much as traveling kind of sucks sometimes, can be a nice change of pace when you're like we are, where you're just working like nonstop all the time. Right. It kind of forces you to just kind of get in the zone and get to the destination, you know. Cool. So for me, just some very like challenges I cannot get into on air, but needless to say, it can be rough sometimes. Doing what I do. That's as much as I can kind of get into without getting, yeah. Yep. But anyhow, so when you deal with like a very big challenge, it's an interesting thing to try to kind of keep your head in the game and not let it phase your momentum. Because right. I'd say like that's one of that actually ties into trips too, but it seems like that's one of the big concerns for me whenever I like have to break out of whatever mindset or whatever that I'm in. It's hard to get get momentum back and clarity back. So yeah. So let's see what else. What's the last part of our art check, Cory? Plans. Thank you. Yeah, so, you've only done like 130 of them. I can't believe.
Right. Yeah. Scott and I plan to go and hang out with Chris Doe tomorrow. That's we're going to do a workshop. So we're at Creative South.
Sweet.
That'll be fun. And then there's a thing. So I don't know, as far as I am going to try to storyboard and sketch some animation ideas for some lower thirds and some title transitions.
Nice.
In between things. So we'll see. We'll see. Best laid plans of mice and men. Sometimes I can do that during lectures, and sometimes I can't. So it depends on how engaging and how much brain power it takes what I'm listening to.
Yeah, and I mean, you definitely don't want to like risk losing the possibility of being present at an event like that, you know. So
right. Or what is the point?
Yeah. Well, what about you, Scott? I'm imagining similar challenges.
Yeah, we got the Christo talk tomorrow, and then after that we have what is a bridge party, and it sounds pretty cool. They're going to do this thing called Ink Wars, which I entered into. Did you enter or not?
I did.
Okay, we both entered, but we didn't get chosen. But basically, they've got these 4x8 like panels that you just basically you got an hour, and there's a DJ and everything, and you just do it like a sketch within an hour, and then somebody wins the Ink War. So that's gonna be cool to watch. I kind of wish I got chosen, although I would have been really nervous if I did. But so that should be pretty fun. So that sounds like a pretty cool party. And then after that, the next day is all the keynote speakers and stuff. And is there another party? I think there's a arcade type party, because it's like retro gaming themed. Seems like this conference this time around.
They even made a video game.
Yeah, they made a little video game. So man, it's going to be cool. Yeah, and hopefully we'll get a chance to get some footage and stuff, so we can show everyone what it's
Awesome.
all about. But I'm just kind of, if I have time to do some sketching and stuff, I'll do that. But there's just a lot of people I want to see and hang out with and meet. And
Yeah. Yeah, and like I do think it's weird, but like events like that, they don't seem like work, but then they are work, and it's like, you know, I think that's it's like a huge part of the process. You need to maintain inspiration and connections with people in the field and stuff. So it's like one of the few times where, like, most of the time when creatives are like, um, you know, especially people who are like working on personal projects, they're like, well, I'm going to pause on my project. I'm like, don't. But if they're at like a convention or like an event, like a design conference, it's like, yes, to like focus on the conference and the convention. like the personal part, like that's a huge part of branding and stuff. So that is work. You know, it's weird because it just feels different than kind of working, like pushing the pencil on the page and stuff.
Victor says Cory and I could be brothers. Yeah, brothers from another mother.
True. That is true. They are brothers, exactly. Blood brothers. All right. So what should we okay, so we came up with a topic and like kind of warned you guys, but I'm a little off my game. What was our topic again?
Creator-owned comics. We were talking about taking it a couple different ways, so we could kind of we'll kind of just see where it goes, knowing that at some point in time I do have to get some sleep. So,
yeah.
So I don't know if I can do like a 2-hour. Well, I know for a fact I can't do a 2-hour one.
So where are we at right now? And let's like challenge ourselves to try to kind of hit that point, so you guys get at least a decent amount of sleep.
If we kept it, it's 12:15. So if we kept it to like less than 45 minutes, that would be awesome.
Let's aim for that. Okay. Yeah. So let's get into it. Cory, do you want to kind of touch a little bit on the creator-owned thing?
Yeah, I think comics have a really interesting history with intellectual property, and I think intellectual property laws are not written well enough to be able to really understand what's going on in the comic book space, because it's a super muddy thing. So like way back in the day, if you guys want two really interesting histories of comics, look up Super Gods. That's a great book. And then the Will Eisner biography is a fantastic book. So basically, like, Eisner was just trying to figure out like how to make it, right? And he found that like the funny pages were starting to really take off, and that people were reading the newspaper because of the funny pages. And so he actually started a business with a terrible businessman who took him for a lot of money and kind of screwed him over. And he was like, what if instead of, you know, having local artists work with individual papers, I just started producing, you know, like comics that that newspapers could subscribe to, right? And so then he started binding them, and he would ship them places, and he had like a delivery mechanism. And anyway, then after that, then you started having like, you know, Superman was created and kind of like came through some of that. And then somebody else was like, oh, I like that Superman guy, but I'm going to do the exact opposite. So instead of everything being in the day, it's going to be at night. And instead of no mask, he's going to have a mask. And instead of, you know, being bright and cheery, he's going to be really dark. And instead of fighting physical things, he's going to fight basically drug-addled things. And so then Batman, and right, and on and on and on and on, right? And so all of this originally started, as is pointed out in the Super Gods, because of like a lot of the capes and tights stuff is just based on Greek and Roman mythology. And I'm not talking about like Thor and that pantheon. I'm talking about like, you look at like Perseus, and he's basically Superman. And so there's this mixture of kind of that concept. And it's kind of like Disney as well, where they started with like, well, let's take some intellectual property that's kind of like out there already.
Started, like, they still are. I mean, what's the
it
Frozen is based on, I think,
Hans
Christian Andersen. Or
yeah, and so they continue to do that, and then the irony is, then they turn around and like defend it as if it was their child being murdered when you do anything with it. Yeah. But then they've created this situation where now, if I were to go work for Marvel, I don't necessarily get, like intellectual property rights. But if I create a new character while I'm working at Marvel, then you have a weird kind of situation with like shop rule and whatever. Like Neil Gaiman had a really interesting situation where he created a character, and it was deemed by the courts to be different enough than an existing character by the same name. And so he like owns the rights to that and brought it over to Image. Anyway, there's like all kinds of like really interesting things. And I don't know where we want to go with that, but like
I had something interesting. I don't know if anyone caught the John Oliver report he did a couple weeks ago on the WWE.
Yeah,
I caught the first part.
Yeah, but it was so eerily similar to comics, and I know there have been some inroads in comics and as far as creators, because what it basically was talking about how all these wrestlers, their contract employee, they're not,
mm-hmm.
they don't own anything. They don't own their persona. They don't own any of that stuff. And, and it's kind of the same thing with comic creators. Whereas, I mean, you could create your own character, but you don't really own it if you're working for Marvel or DC. And you find all these wrestlers, how, at the end of their career, now granted, those wrestlers get beat up a lot and they die very young, but we don't have to deal with that as much, the physical aspects of it. But a lot there, because like things like is it the comic book legal defense fund, or is there another?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, the legal defense
fund. Yeah. No, maybe that's something else. That's for what's the one for artists who are basically, or can't really retire or whatever.
They've done donation.
Okay. Yeah, but it's like when cartoonists get older, it's like they have nothing. I mean, you listen to like the story of,
Bill Finger.
Yeah, well, yeah, or Schuster.
Like he invented like the most iconic character ever, Siegel and Schuster, and they were like penniless. I mean, Bill Finger did Batman.
Yeah.
It was like he was homeless. He was homeless when he died.
Yeah.
And Steve Ditko died fairly poor. In like I think he was in like a 1-bedroom apartment in New York. And I mean, that's the guy who, without a doubt, like created the majority of Spider-Man, and not just beyond. Like, it's funny because there's even times where it's like, like Kirby gets ripped, but then you see the original Ditko pages, and he'd make notes to Stan Lee telling him what's happening in the story. So it's like he wouldn't. He literally would create the entire thing, and then Stan Lee would be like, "Let's make that word Excelsior." Like, it's pretty dark. So it's weird because it's like, well, we've talked about this a little bit when Stan Lee passed away, but it was like such a mixed feeling because I really admire and respect Stan Lee and what he did for comics, but then there's a part of me that's aware of some of the darker stuff, and so it's like you're left with this kind of tension of a real human being rather than some like untouchable icon. But it was weird that him and Ditko kind of died the same year, and Lee, passed away being probably a multimillionaire, and Ditko passed away probably making the income of like a fast food employee, which is pretty sad considering. So one died with like a lot of great health care and like all the opportunities to do well in their old age, and then the other, pretty crappy insurance. So it's like,
it's a weird thing because there are benefits to being an employee where you get
100%
sometimes get benefits and things like that, and but there are takeaways, like if you're an employee, then your employer owns pretty much what you create.
Yeah.
There's these weird situations, whether it's wrestling or comics, where you're not an employee, you're a contractor, but they still get to keep everything. You don't get benefits. Well, as a contractor, you typically don't get benefits, but it's like everything's going to the company, and you're basically getting the shaft for the most part. Now, I know, like Cory had mentioned, now they have certain deals, like if you do create a character, you get some kind of residuals or something like that. So, but that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for people like Neil. Who's the one that fought
Gaiman was
Neil Adams. Neil Adams
fought.
kind of really fought for that.
Who created Howard?
What's that?
Who was the guy who created Howard the Duck? I'm forgetting that guy. He was a Marvel guy, but I just forget his name. Anyhow, he was like a huge early proponent, like kind of the big two for like, you know, a living wage and for potential rights to the character. Now it's interesting because even now, I'm not super familiar, but I know the majority of like Marvel artists aren't on full contract. And so they're freelance. But if you look into the amount of books these guys put out, and then the fact that they're working like 16-hour days, like nonstop, if they're on a full run, like if they're on a monthly, and the guys that are on contract, like I'm pretty sure, and correct me if I'm wrong in the chats, tell me like how foolish I am or something, but my understanding is like the salary's not super incredible. It's not bad. It's just not great, and it definitely doesn't pay a living, like a wage that's easy to make a living, like in the areas that you need to be on the contract. But it's Steve Gerber. Thank you, Victor, in the chats. Yeah, Steve Gerber was like a big proponent. Yeah. But anyhow, so like, yeah, it's one of those things of like, I don't even think there's insurance attached to those contracts. So even the contract employees who have like an exclusive, like I'm pretty sure they're having to pull their own insurance payments outside of that. Now, if I'm wrong about that, I'm wrong, but that's what I've understood about it. So it really is kind of a weird thing. Like animation has a kind of similar hustle, although usually they offer pretty hefty insurance when you're on a project, like especially if you're, you know, like on like a TV show that's animated.
Animation there's an animators guild.
Yeah, exactly.
That negotiates in mass for rights and things. And so, because I mean, that's another big thing that happens a lot in comics that is largely unregulated. That's very regulated in a lot of other areas, is like credit. You know, I mean, if you freelance or do contract work or work full time on a Pixar or a movie or whatever, you know exactly and precisely the location of your name, the order of your name, and how it's spelled, and there are legal forms that you fill. I mean, it's like, but like. And there are even rules on how that should be covered in the press and things like that. Whereas, you know, there's the ongoing thing of like what you mentioned before, Josh, where, you know, you have kind of the Marvel method, quote unquote, which is basically like, I'm writing, you know, 20 books a month right now. And so I'm just going to give you like a general story outline. And then the artist comes up with, you know, I need 6 pages of fighting here and make them say some stuff. I'll write the dialogue later. Right.
Yeah.
It's a very collaborative process making a comic book. It's not like factory work where you are not contributing intellectual property. You're just contributing labor. It's very much, you know, a matter of the mind and the hand. And so it becomes really muddy because there's a big debate that continues to go on of who is the actual creator of a comic book character. Is it the person who comes up with the name and the attributes of that character, or is it the person who designs their likeness and their costume and their you know, their look and all of that stuff, and where does that actually fall? Because if you look at Spider-Man, the original design for Spider-Man was basically like kind of like those He-Man characters where it's like, well, we've got all these guys that look the same, and this guy has spider stuff, right? And then somebody else came along and was like, no, let's actually take a stab at this, you know, and like design an original looking character.
Yeah. Like really good. Another good example when it was mentioned at the top of Bill Finger, right? You look at the first version of Batman pre Bill Finger, and it was basically like Superman blue. Like it was not even remotely close to the iconic Batman. There was no bat logo. There was like, I think at that point there was no Alfred. There was no like backstory to it. There was no like parents getting killed or anything. It was just like I don't know, like we got all these other animal men. Let's do a Batman, and then just put him in a blue costume and call him a Batman. Like, it's just anyhow. It's interesting. If what is the documentary on Bill Finger too? We should mention that because people should check that out.
I didn't know.
Yeah, it's on Hulu and it's fantastic.
Isn't it Searching for Bill Finger?
It's something like that. I think if you just search Batman or Bill Finger, it'll come up.
Yeah, but it's really good, and it's interesting because it's like one of those documentaries where the guy filming it like stumbled on gold, because initially their goal was just to kind of talk to Bill Finger, and then the more involved they got, they ended up kind of documenting this whole legal suit where, you know, his daughter like took on like, you know, DC at like one of the biggest heights, like right during like the Dark Knight franchise boot. So they just had loads of money at that time, and she took on that corporation with like a single lawyer and ended up and you can see the results by just watching any Batman film now, because he always gets a co-credit, which means she's getting a slice of that pie, which is kind of like so anytime there's a toy sold or something like that, now some of the money actually goes to Bill Finger. So yeah, so let's get into it. Like, I mean, I'd say there's the short-term advantage of working for a company, and keep in mind the comics industry has gone through a lot of changes. Cory, you mentioned at the top, like Neil Gaiman, like that's a good example, because Image is always brought up as this like bastion of creator-owned stuff. But one of the biggest things that happened for a writer that was a guest writer on a comic, it ended up changing the law a little bit about creators, like people who actually write a character, getting a piece of that character on like the market. And that's why like the comics industry now allocates a bit if you develop a character. It's a result of that. And that was actually a lawsuit against Todd McFarlane, because Neil Gaiman came up with Angela, like who was like this hot angel, and he came up with her whole backstory and guest wrote the issue, being told like, hey, this is just a guest issue. We're having like Dave Sim on the next one, or like we had Dave Sim on the previous one. So there were all these guest artists, and they were told verbally like, no, like this is just a one-shot thing, you know, so just go wild. But then that character became so popular, they kept bringing the character back. But he never attributed it to Neil Gaiman. And then they're making action figures and selling. And I think Neil Gaiman got like a peek at like the money they're making off this character that he made for the comic, and was kind of like, oh, I'm going to sue you. Like, and he won, because they were like, yeah, I guess if you create the character, you should probably get a piece of that. And so it's an interesting thing, but do we want to get into kind of like the advantages? Like, what are the advantages for an artist of working in a non-creator owned atmosphere? Because I think we're all going to be, because since we're all working on creator owned stuff, I think we're probably going to side that way. But just to do devil's advocate at first, what do you think the benefits are to not doing creator owned work?
I think there's a huge benefits to not doing creator-owned work, and then I'll argue with myself after this. But because the reason that you do creator-owned work, and Scott and I were talking about this in the drive over from the airport, is the possibility of something. You know, you do creator-owned because of the possibility that it does something. But I worked for other people because of the guarantee that it does something, and so like. I know that every 2 weeks I get a check. I know that I have guaranteed work. I know that I have, my mortgage paid for, and like there's, and if I'm not interested in the possibility of things, and I like the stability and guarantee of things, at least for while I'm working there, there's consistent work. And that can go away at any given time and whatnot. But like, I'm not getting paid to draw the comics that I'm drawing right now, and no one is buying them. You know what I mean? And I'm not like hustling and trying to sell and, doing that and stuff like that. But if I did, I would be selling to tens of people and hopefully eventually hundreds of people. But, the possibility is out there that it gets optioned for TV and it becomes a giant toy franchise, and that there's you know, there's all this stuff, and you know, I mean, like Deadly Class and Hellboy, and you know, all of that is within the realm of possibility, but exceptionally unlikely.
Yeah, I would say. I mean, there are because even the average Marvel or DC artist, they're not making a lot of money. I mean, there are the higher tier, the famous people, they're doing really good, but they're like the 1% or whatever. But if you are sort of an average artist working on a title that somebody knows, one of the benefits is that if you go to, I mean, if you go to say a convention or whatever, you're known as the artist, or you could even take that and parlay it. I've seen artists who work for Marvel or DC. They're probably not, I don't know if they're like super famous, but they'll have like a YouTube channel and get tons of views drawing characters that they've drawn for Marvel. And they can build an audience that way, at shows and things like that. Because just that, you see the average person that goes to a comic convention, that they're into those characters. They're not going to be searching for your own creator, people's creator own characters, more or less. So if you go to a convention, I'm the artist of I don't know, Ghost Rider or whoever, just somebody. It doesn't even have to be one of the big ones. That has some, some traction there with the people walking the floor and everything. So and you can kind of take that, you can kind of build off of that. So there is some benefit to doing that, but in the end, like I said, if you're not in that superstardom range of Marvel or DC artists, if you're just a kind of a working class, like a journeyman Marvel artist, you're not I mean, maybe you're making more than somebody doing a creator own, because if that creator own hasn't hit, chances are you're probably not making much. But somebody like me who turns around and does a comic book for, say, a nonprofit or something like that is going to be making more money than your typical Marvel or DC artist, because that's something that it's different. It's not comics, and comics is kind of like, you don't make a lot of money in comics, but there's other ways. Like if you do Bob's Big Boy used to do comics. So say if I don't know if they still do or not, but I'm guessing that they, in their prime or somebody else like that. If another restaurant decided, hey, we want to do a promotion for kids, we want to do a comic book, that's going to pay a lot more than what Marvel or DC is going to pay you. So that's another avenue that a lot of people don't look for, that's not creator owned either, but it can pay a little more.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think tacking onto that, like a kind of unknown fact, I think among a lot of comic fans, is that there's a very good percentage of like Marvel and DC artists who work full time, like hardcore on monthlies for DC or Marvel, but also have a pretty serious full time job doing animation or doing commercial art or doing illustration, and kind of capitalizing on the name they've built through comics to kind of make a living. But I've rarely met cartoonists that are just solely making a living on comics. And the ones I have, usually it's creator owned, and it's because they sold or licensed their comic. Because I don't meet a lot of creator owned guys unless they get a deal, like unless their book sells like crazy, and then they get picked up by like Scholastic or like a major kids book publisher that's going to have like giant distribution model, or a major publisher that has like a giant distribution model. Most of the time I rarely hear about like any cartoonists that are like seriously making a really good living. But I mean, like, once again, there's the advantage of like, if you're on a property and you love Batman and your whole goal in life has been to draw Batman, and then you end up drawing Batman, which, by the way, would be really hard because they usually only give that title to like the heavy hitters,
Sure.
Which goes back to that 1% that Scott was talking about. But still, let's say you're hypothetically in that 1%, and all you've wanted your whole life was to draw Batman, and now you're drawing Batman. A lower paycheck to do something you absolutely adore isn't necessarily a terrible thing. So
I think that's what they're counting. I think that's what Marvel or DC, they just know. There's so many people that want to do comics, and would basically do it for free or pay. Some people might even pay Marvel or DC so they can make comics for them. And and they know that. So I mean, it's like, why do we need to offer much when there's so many people to pull from and everybody wants to do this.
And then there's guys like, I mean, I don't think I'd ever want to be on like a monthly like Marvel title. I think it would be fun for just like, because I read them as a kid, to do like maybe a one-off or like a mini series or something. But I'd have some really serious questions if it were like a full monthly title, because I'd be like, is that sustainable? Like, could I like live while doing that? And for that very reason. But you're right. I think that's an exploited thing. And that's exploited with artists and a lot of fun properties. I've seen that exploited by a lot of big companies that even do offer benefits and stuff. They'll kind of slim it down because people love to work for the big company and have that name. So it's a weird thing, but yeah. So can you guys think of any other? I mean, I'm sure there's a million others, but any other big advantages that come to mind before we kind of get into destroying the?
Yeah, I do think that there are people out there that it depends on whether you value security over over whatever the opposite of that would be. But if security is high on your value list, then I know lots of people at Disney and whatever that are like eager to leave or have left, and then they go start and they do their other thing, and like Scott's saying, like they get that kind of springboard boost. Like nobody that I've ever worked for it is a household name. Nobody would be like, oh cool, you worked for so and so.
Yeah.
There's already some like clout and credibility and like gravitas that kind of comes with that. No, it's like it's just solely on whatever, like nothing that I've ever done in my career for someone else gives my parents bragging rights or whatever. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And so there's a significant amount of value to that, and,
yeah.
I think there is that being able to like, I'm going to show up to work and I do X, and I'm a cog in the machine and I get to be creative at work, and it's great, and that's all I want. And if that's cool, then that's great. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. There's lots of people like that.
Yeah.
So far, this has been a really depressing conversation.
All right, so let's try to pep it up. I mean, it's tough. It's tough because I think we're all exhausted. And how much time do we got left on this thing? Like maybe 10, 15 minutes?
15 minutes.
All right, so let's, in 15 minutes, try to coax people into our camp. Convert these people.
Well, so I think here's the thing. I kind of have a foot in both camps, right? And we were talking about this a lot, but I like working for other people because of the security, because of the pay, because of the whatever. But I use that as a way to do work on my own. Like I don't have to take clients on if I don't want to. Like the only clients that I take on now are the ones that I'm like, yeah, that's a super cool project. I love that idea. I'm totally going to do that. And that's because I've made that choice, right? But with that, I actually do have the potential of like, something taken off. And if you take finances off of the table, there's also like, this is the story that I wanted to tell, and no one else got in the way. And that's one thing. That's one thing about comics that is fascinating. Is I started like some people, like I want to do a short film, and so I started like getting into this animation thing, and I'm like, you know what? This is if I did this by myself, this is like a lifetime commitment, to finish this story. But if I put in 6 to 18 months, I could tell that same story in a graphic novel format and be done. And I would tell it exactly the way that I wanted to tell it, and nobody else would have the right or ability to say, oh, you can't do that, or you should do this, and I'd have to listen to. I'm like, I get opinions and stuff, but at the end of that, that's all me. right? There's nobody else's finger in that pie. You know, I don't have to do a case study at the end explaining, you know, well, I was the one that, you know, that contributed this piece of, you know, I made this character blush in scene 47 or whatever, you know, like I just say, no, like everything that you see, read, feel, and think, that's all me in that. I think there's a lot of really cool stuff with that.
Yeah. Yeah. So the control is a good thing, like in the sense of if you're an artist who's like frustrated, not having your vision come to like full fruition because it hits roadblocks or because of the nature of collaboration. I mean, there's like two different kind of wins, but most work you're going to do corporate, most work that's corporate or where you don't actually end up with the creator ownership tends to be like non singular visions. Like there are some rare scenarios where the stars align and that's not the case, but the majority of the time it's going to be a team effort, and part of that team is going to be like the corporate and the producer or the person funding it, like all of that stuff, all the different chains that you have to go through to kind of get this thing out. Let's say you're working for the MCU. Well, now you have to make sure that like this character is supposed to get killed off in your comics, so you have to work that into your story. So if you have a beautiful story or not, like now you're going to have to write in, you know, this character getting killed off because that's what the MCU told you to do, you know? And if like my point is if you're at the point where you want to see your vision come through and come to fruition, then that's what you got to do, right? Is just actually like go for creator owned, because creator owned, once again, that's the beauty of it, is there's less cogs to kind of get the thing done. And in comics in particular, but I'm definitely with Cory. So I don't have much to add to that, except I'm comfortable having a steady day job. I'm not fooled to think that it's stable, because I do think that's kind of an illusion. Whether you're freelance or you're full time, it's like really there is no security in life in general. Security is kind of an illusion. Nature's wild and violent, and we're lucky if we have walls preventing us from having to live in nature, you know? So it's like, most of that stuff is like, there is some actions you can take to kind of prevent nature, but at the same time, like, there are smart steps you can take, but nobody's got the power to like prevent like a hurricane when it's coming. And, that's kind of the nature of the beast. And, I'm actually reminded, like at the NCS, Tony Bancroft did a talk, and one of the most like poignant things he mentioned, I mean, this is a guy who's like been up for an Oscar, directed a Disney film, and he's working on indie animations. And he was like, he turns to all of us cartoonists and he's like, I'm kind of nervous talking about this with cartoonists because you guys know the game. You know, it's just you're only as good as your last project. And I'm like, if somebody who's been up for an Oscar is saying that, where it's like you're literally like you're only as valid in this industry as your last project, and has worked for like some of the stable companies, then you got to kind of take that to heart and realize, like, yeah, I mean, that's the boat all of us creatives are in. But creator owned, do you have any other ideas? I mean, Scott, you got anything to add to that? Like,
yeah.
other
benefits? So I'm curious because I mean, obviously, it's a long shot that if you create your own creator book that it's going to become successful and optioned by whoever. But if you make the comparison, because we were talking before about that 1% of Marvel artists who are the superstars that are making tons and tons of money. And I don't want to make this all about money. Obviously, we're in comics, so we're not. That's not the case. But if you make that comparison, is it any less likely that you could create your own comic and have it either picked up as something, whether TV show or whatever, than it would be to become one of those top Marvel or DC 1% artists?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And what's weird is when you look at a lot of those top 1% artists at Marvel and DC, most of them started with creator-owned indie stuff. I I mean, that's the nature of where it's going.
Yeah.
Comics, because the front door is so jammed, like with the gatekeeping, that people have really just started, and they love comics. Like we said at the top, like there's nobody working for Marvel and DC like for the money, I would hope, because it's just like, it's, you know, in that case you should probably go into bank telling and work your way up into like real estate, or like, not real estate, that's a bad example because of the crash, but you know, like go like trade on the stock market or something and make like serious money. But like most people in comics are in love with comics, and because of that, when they hit that gate, they just couldn't not make comics. So they just made comics through whoever would publish them. And if people wouldn't publish them, they just put out their own books. And weirdly enough, a lot of those people get offered Marvel contracts later on, because, you know, they've proven their worth like through the indie circuit. So it's kind of a catch-22 too, because like there's times where even if you want to go with the non-creator owned, like it might be a better route to get in with with the non-creator owned stuff, like the big property you've always wanted to work with, just by showing off your skills on indie stuff, creator owned stuff, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Marvel and I assume DC, well, I think Marvel and both Marvel and DC are pulling talent from like web comics and just the people who write prose and different things, and they're looking outside of just, you know, they're bringing in other people that you know, that have proved themselves outside of comics, or maybe with their own stuff or whatever. So yeah, you're definitely right about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm reminded, like, this is a long time ago when we did BIPT, but we interviewed Derek Kim, and he was talking about his experience, like getting to do like an issue of Spider-Man, which was like a big deal for him. And he talked about it, and he was like, this is what he said, but he was like, he used to go to conventions and do the portfolio reviews and go the steps, like how to do it the Marvel way, how to get in with Marvel. So he'd go to all these conventions and get critiques, and they'd be like, "You're not ready, kid. You got to work on perspective. You're not ready, kid. You got to work on arms. You're not ready. You got to work on dynamic paneling." Like, he went through that for years and finally got to the point where he brought his portfolio, and they're like, "You're great, man. We should hire you." And every single person in the line was like, "Dude, this is excellent. We should hire you." And then they followed it with, "But we don't have any work, so." And he was like, "Wait, that's not like, we don't just get the magic in at that point." And then like he never got contacted. Like he constantly sent out portfolios, and it's only after he did Same Difference, which he did as a web comic, and then he published, self-published got his Eric grant, and then after that got an offer from Top Shelf to take it, and from there got like the Eisner, the Harvey, the Ignatz for his own creator-owned work, and suddenly Marvel's on the phone going, "Hey, do you want to do like an issue of Spider-Man?" Like, that's kind of how like that's a story I've heard a lot. But to me, when I heard that, I was like, "Oh wow, I mean, this is when I was younger, as a younger cartoonist, and I remember that really hitting home for me, because it was like, oh, if it's like that for him and he's amazing, like what makes me think it'll be different, you know?" It's very interesting. But I do think like that's a huge reason. Do we want to talk about like just the kind of, like, maybe just to kind of cap it off, like the spiritual payoff of doing creator owned work?
Yeah. I mean, well, I'll tell a story that could be told a billion different ways. But I've done one show, right? And there's a guy that I know through a bunch of other people, so I don't really know him very well. Anyway, he was talking. He's like, "Hey, how'd that show go?" And I was like, "Oh, it was fun. You know, I kind of lost money because, you know, I brought my own stuff, and I think most people are kind of interested in whatever, you know." And I said, "Did you get anything at the show?" And he was telling me, "Oh yeah, I got this thing." And he's telling me about the characters that are in the prints that he bought. And I said, "Oh, cool. Who's the artist that you got that from?" And he started describing the location of their booth. And he was like, "Yeah, they're like, you know, near the front by the bathroom." And like, he didn't know their name, right? And so there's kind of this trade-off of one of the reasons that doing your own work and putting in your own effort and whatever is valuable is that it's you, right? Like if I was like when Sean Gordon Murphy does Batman, it's Sean Gordon Murphy's Batman. When Frank Miller does Batman, it's Frank Miller's Batman. But most everybody else, the other, 5,000 artists that have done Batman, you can list the half a dozen that everybody is aware of, but everybody else was doing Batman and people are excited about Batman, right? Now that's a numbers game. But on the other hand, when somebody buys the Tonkat Sparrow from me, or somebody comes on and they like my stickers, they know who I am. They're connecting with something that I've created, which means that they're connecting with something that is like a part of me, and messages and ideas that I've put out into the world. And so I think it's a deeper connection, and I think it's a better relationship. And that's the biggest thing for me is I would like to get people to think about things and if I draw Wonder Woman all the time, then people that are into Wonder Woman have more awesome Wonder Woman art, which is great. But it doesn't necessarily do anything for me because, if I go out and I say, I just did a whole set of stickers on government surveillance that you guys should, maybe it just makes people a little bit more aware of that and it gets people thinking, and then they go and they're thinking about Cory Kerr's work rather than random stuff. There's a kind of a higher level of connection with people, which I think is lost a lot of the times in kind of our consumer economy where it's just like consume as much volume of content as you possibly can. If your work can get somebody to stop and think about something, then you as a person have made a connection with another human being rather than somebody else like bolstering their enjoyment of a fictional property.
Yes. So I think we're losing Scott. So let's wrap. Scott, you got any last thoughts on it?
What's that? Sorry.
You got any last thoughts on this to kind of cap this up on hopefully a positive note for people?
No, just, I mean, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but create our own stuff. I mean,
I like it.
There's enough, Batman. And we need new stuff. We need original ideas, and you guys have the power to put that out in the world. And I don't know. I'm a big proponent. Obviously, that's what I do. So I think more people should do it.
100%. I'll just cap it with. So I was listening to Mark Maron, T-Bone Burnett. He's like a really famous musician, pretty excellent musician. I think he worked on the like "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou" like soundtrack and stuff. But he's also like really known as well for being like a music producer. He's produced like 1 billion records, and he was being interviewed, and he was saying like that a lot of people say that bands' first albums are so good because they had 20 years to make that first album, and then they have like 2 to make the next. So it's like 20 years worth of work. Of course, it's going to be great. 2 years, it's like it's bound to kind of fail. But he was like, he didn't think that. And he was like, actually, he's like, the reason as a producer, he liked producing records of bands and first records in particular was that they hadn't been screwed with by the industry yet. And so he was saying like, that's why first records are good because like corporate didn't get involved. Like they kind of take a minimal effort at that point because the money's not there dangling. It's a risk at that point. So they're more willing to just kind of be like, I don't know, track it, make it cool, whatever. Whereas the second album, especially following a really successful one, suddenly you got all the suits come in and they're like, you know what you should do? You should mix like hip hop with this. You should like try to talk to these. We have all these market statistics that say you should head in this direction, and they lose the very thing that like made it beautiful and authentic in the first place. So Cory and Scott and I all have like talked about authenticity, but I'd say if you want pure authenticity, like create our own work. It's going to be sometimes ugly. It might be terrible. It might be beautiful, but whatever that ugly, terrible maybe mid-grade, whatever quality it is that you put out, it's authentic. And there's something to be said for that, because I think when you don't do creator-owned stuff, you do suffer a loss of authenticity, which is unfortunate. So let's wrap it up. You're on my channel. You know where to find me. You know what's we'll kind of tie it in later with Scott's wrap up on how you sign up. Cory, where can everybody find your work and stuff?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. You can go to CoryKerr.com, CoryKerr, and people make my day when they leave a comment on anything I've made. So go look at some stuff and tell me what you think. Unless you don't like it, then I don't need your opinion. You can tell me that. Fine.
Abe in the chats was curious if you guys are going to reenact Planes, Trains, and Automobiles.
No, we're not staying in the same room.
You're not going to wake up and go, those aren't two pillows. And then Victor, very rightly, because we haven't mentioned this and we should mention it, he said, did you guys hear about that Kickstarter that was successfully funded? Young and the Dead? Congrats, Scott. And I agree. Congrats. And you overfunded, which is awesome. And that's a feat that's super incredible, dude, considering all the crazy Facebook challenges and hurdles you had to hit to get there. You got there, and really congrats on putting in the work and getting your creator-owned thing out there, man. That's amazing.
Thanks. Yeah, I've been so busy. I haven't had a chance to send the thing out thanking everyone, or update on Kickstarter, but I need to do that. Usually I like to do a video, but I can't really. I don't have my lab over here and all that kind of stuff, But
yeah, definitely don't record it right now, because you'll be like half asleep.
Right,
like,
yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah.
All right, so Scott, let's wrap this up. Where can people find you? And then also, I mean, it was confusing this week. It was on my channel. It usually alternates between my channel and your channel, and now it's on my channel again because you guys are on the road, and this kind of thing happens. So how are people supposed to keep track of that?
Yeah, and by the way, thank you, Josh, for hosting twice in a row.
Oh, no worries.
Yeah, so yeah, it's kind of crazy. We're on a different day, a different channel. I mean, it's how do you figure all this stuff out? Well, the way you figure that out is you go to the link in the description of this video, which will take you to our mailing list. And usually about 30 minutes ahead of time, we'll send out a newsletter letting people know where they can find us, what channel we're going to be on, all that stuff. And I kind of went into that and I forgot to do my little tell people where to find me. But you can find me at circworks.com, and while you're there, pick up the Comic Maker Starter Kit. It's free. Just join my personal mailing list, and I give you some cool stuff. I sent a newsletter out a couple days ago, actually, with an exclusive video and an art hack and all kinds of cool stuff. So there's not only do you get that kit, but there's also a lot of value in the newsletter. If you stay on it, you'll get some value out of it. So.
All right, man. So your guys' conference starts tomorrow, right? Well, or today in your world.
Yes.
So enjoy that. We'll look forward to having a follow-up when you guys are back and pumped and rested. And in the meantime, thank you guys for like doing this from the road, because to me that just encourages me to like keep on trucking, because it's like we're making this work, like rain or shine, travel or not. So thanks to you guys, and thanks to those of you in the chats, especially those of you who are joining us like super late at night. I think we're feeling your pain. So and that'll do it. We'll see you guys next week with hopefully like a recap of how it went for you guys. Bye, everyone.
Later.